Welcome back.
Hi, Patty. Good to be back.
The first time we talked was in 2000 after the release of your debut novel, Backroads. It became a New York Times bestseller, an Oprah Book Club pick, and a Book of the Month Club main selection. Tell us a little bit about how much pressure you felt come writing book number 2 and book number 3.
Well, book number 2, there was a lot of pressure, as you just said, because it was a bestseller and an Oprah pick. And the problem with being an Oprah pick, if you can imagine there's a problem, is that the people who buy the book are Oprah's audience. They're not the author's audience, and they follow the pick. They don't necessarily follow you. So when you're about to write that second book, you're told ahead of time by your publisher, and even Oprah took me aside and told me, you know, don't get caught up in all this because your next book will probably not sell like your first book. But that doesn't really help you. You feel like you're going to be a failure if you don't write another bestseller. I also had lots of readers that loved my work, and I didn't want to let them down. It was critically acclaimed as well, so there was a tremendous amount of pressure. It took me 4 years to write the follow-up novel, and I'm sure that's had something to do with it. Once it was out, my readers loved it. It was really well reviewed. It did not sell like Backroads, but I was really relieved to find out that I didn't want to kill myself when that happened, and I went on, and I was just really relieved that I did write the second book, that I was not a one-book wonder. Then writing the third one, that was a lot easier. The pressure was off.
You say the one-book wonder, and there is this impression that you were an overnight sensation, and the fact is that you wrote 6 unpublished books before Backroads.
Wait, 5. Let's not make it worse than it is. Yeah. Well, yes, I did. I had been writing novels for 10 years, 11 years, 5 novels over that period of time, and they all were rejected. And so I was definitely not an overnight success. And I had been writing since I was a kid. This is what I've always done. But I had been writing about things I didn't know about, which is the cardinal rule of writing. Write what you know. I was violating that, and I wasn't writing about where I came from and the people I grew up with and the communities I knew so well. I was writing what I thought other people would want to read, and I didn't think they'd want to read about a coal town in western Pennsylvania. And when I decided to write about that, that was Backroads, and that made all the difference.
And in fact, that western Pennsylvania coal mine setting has gotten you through 3 of your books, and with great interest. I want to talk a little bit about this one now. Sister Mine is the one you recently gave birth to, and I'm saying gave birth to because you do say sort of tongue-in-cheek that writing a book is sort of like giving birth, and then you send her out into the world, and your question in one of the postings you have online is, will people understand her?
Yes, you do feel that way about your books, and I am a mother of 2 children, so I know what I'm talking about when I make the comparison. I think I said it's like giving birth, though not as messy.
Right.
And it's like raising a child, though not as expensive. The creative process, there's a lot of pain and joy involved in it, and then you worry about your books like you worry about your kids. And some days you're proud of that book, and some days you're disappointed. And right now, Sister Mine is at that point where I am sending her off into the world, like when you send your kids off to college or when they leave home for however they do that. And yeah, I'm worried. You know, will people understand her? Will they like her? Will she behave herself? Will she be a good book or a bad book? I don't know. And I keep referring to Sister Mine as she because my first 2 books were written from a male perspective. So I think of them as my boys. This is my first girl.
In fact, the main character in this is Shaylin Penrose, who is a single mom and ex-cop with, quote, a closet full of miniskirts and a recklessly sharp tongue. You said that you don't choose your characters, they choose you. And in fact, you were sort of pushing Shaylin away, and she just would not be put off.
Yes, I didn't want to write from a female voice. And I know that sounds strange because I am a woman, but I had success, great success, both commercially and critically writing in a male voice for 2 novels. And so when it came time to write my 3rd book, I actually was writing about the 5 coal miners who are the backstory in Sister Mine. The Jolly Mount 5, they were nicknamed by the press. They were 5 miners who were involved in a mining accident and were rescued. And a lot of media hoopla surrounded them. They were national celebrities, and the book is taking place several years later. What has happened to these men? What has happened to this town when they've had to go back to their regular lives? Shaylin was sort of this minor character who was sort of just bugging me, but I didn't want to have her as a character in this book. I really didn't want the female voice, and I didn't, she really hadn't showed herself to me and I didn't know her well. So I wrote about 150 pages of the first draft of this book. I sent it to my agent. She read it, she got back to me. She said, oh, the writing's great, the characters are great, but there's something missing. Read it again, see if you can figure it out. And I read it, I stepped back and thought about it, and what was missing was the main character and the plot. But other than that, it was a really good book. But main characters and plots are very important, and it turned out that Shaylin was the main character. And I realized that, and I had to then accept her and try and find her voice and her character. And once I did find her, she was really enjoyable to write, much more so than my two male protagonists. So
we're talking about sort of a racy, raucous female character. In many ways, your male characters are sort of black and white, normal, and your female characters are neon, bigger than life.
She is definitely bigger than life, and I think the interesting thing is Harley from Backroads, the main character of Backroads, and Ivan from Coal Run, they both had very, very tough lives, just like Shaylin. The difference was they sort of had a much more downtrodden view of their lives, and when I was writing those characters, I worried about them constantly. I didn't know if they were going to survive the book and how things were going to turn out for them. Shaylin, even though she had has had a terrible, terrible life, I always was completely confident in her ability to survive. And yeah, she's really over the top, and but very fun to write. And it's interesting when I get out in the rest of the world, outside of small town Pennsylvania, there will every once in a while be a person or a reviewer who's like, oh, she's like, this is over the top. This kind of woman doesn't exist. And I just want to bring them back to my hometown and say, oh yeah, there's one, there's one. I do know women like this.
Is there a little bit of you?
What's in Shaylin's character that's me is that she says and does the things that I wish I had the guts to say and do. Some of the scenes, like there's a scene early in the book where she beats up this guy in a bar. He's a real jerk. He's an ex-con. He doesn't take care of his kids. He's just a terrible person. And she's had it with him. He insults the bartender who's a friend of hers. And she just had it with him. And she just beats the crap out of him. And I think we've all been in these situations
right.
where wouldn't we like to do that? But and of course there's some ramifications for doing that, but and the way she talks, her dialogue was so fun to write, because basically it's like, oh, in that situation, that's what I would like to say, but I don't, because I'm being nice. So she says what she wants.
You say writing a novel is hard, it's exhausting and all-consuming. You have to do it completely on your own. There's no one to pick up the slack on those days when you're not at your best, and there's no one to share the blame on those days you fail outright. I've talked with a number of writers over the years, and they talk about this career as being a very isolating career. If you don't like to be alone, don't be a writer.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And I'm not sure, I've often thought about it if, which way it works. If because I was sort of a loner, that I became a writer, or if because I was a writer, I became a loner. I don't know how that works, but yeah, you spend so much time by yourself. And even when you're in a crowded room, half the time you're writing in your head. The way you're observing people and the world, it's a whole different way of looking at things than I think average people or non-writers look at things. And yeah, so you have to be able to spend lots of time by yourself and be very disciplined. People, when they talk about writers, it's always like, well, you don't have a real job. It's like, well, yes, it's true. I don't have to get up and be at the office by 9, but I have to make myself write every day, and that's not always easy. It's sometimes very, very hard.
And in fact, sometimes these characters keep you up at night. You want to go to sleep, but they keep presenting themselves.
Yeah, a lot, especially first thing in the morning. I mean, my characters, it's almost like clockwork. They wake me up every day at 6 a.m. I'm awake with all these great thoughts for my books. And I can never get them on paper quick enough, and then they're gone. But yeah, you never know. When you really get into a book, they can really just dominate your life. And there are these people in your head, and you have to live with them. It's like you have two lives. You have your real life with your real family, and you have this other family of characters.
Well, speaking of two lives, Sister Mine is really a double entendre. It's wordplay here. Sister Mine, Shaylin, who is the protagonist, and her sister Shannon, those two sisters, and then the two sister minds. Talk a little bit about wordplay and the role it plays in your writing. In fact, I think, for instance, Jolly Mount, I think you were kind of having fun with that, the name of the
yes,
mine.
because the real name of the town is Jolimont. It's beautiful mountain, which is the French for that. And it was the town of Dubois, which made me think of this, because Dubois is Dubois, of the woods. It's a French. There are lots of towns in Pennsylvania that have French names, but the pronunciation has become Americanized over the years. Dubois is an example. And so Jolimont becomes Jolly Mount, and I thought that was just so ideal for a name for a town that's a depressed, broken down, dreary coal town. And yeah, I love to play with words. That's one of the reasons why I'm a writer. I just love language, and in this particular book, Shaylin plays an oxymoron game with one of the miners, Jimmy, and that was so much fun, coming up with all these oxymorons. And yes, Sister Mine is talking about the mines in this community. They're named after women. And when Shaylin and Shannon were little girls, they thought that that was one of the greatest honors that could be bestowed on a woman, is to have a coal mine named after them. While other girls, other places wanted to be beauty queens or supermodels or ballerinas, they wanted to have a coal mine named after them. So that is what it's about.
These oxymorons and these plays on words, they make it difficult for a translator. I should say that you married a translator, and your first book, Backroads, was translated into 8 different languages, and it's been published in 20 different countries. I just can't imagine what a challenge it would be even to translate Sister Mine and let people know what your two meanings are here.
It's extremely difficult, and yes, my French translator is also now my husband, and we met when he translated Backroads into French. He has since translated Coal Run and Sister Mine, and yeah, he has a really difficult time translating my books into French, because, for instance, oxymorons in France, that whole concept is such an academic concept. Like there's no way a coal miner and a cop would in France would even know this term or would be using these words in this way. So he's really had to be very creative with my books, and especially with the jargon. How do you capture that Western Pennsylvania, the talk about the mines and everything? Yeah, so they're a real challenge. And actually, when he was translating Coal Run, we almost split up.
Fighting over how it's being interpreted?
Well, I don't get involved, okay. But I could tell he was he gets so involved. I mean, that's such an intimate act, and I wasn't prepared, because when he translated Backroads, I didn't know him. I met him afterwards. With Coal Run, we were actually together, living in the same home, and knowing that every day he was there with my book, being so intimately involved with it, and he makes it a rule he won't discuss what he's doing with me, because he doesn't want to get that involvement with the author, which I understand. He just wants the work. And I would come in, I'd be like, why haven't you said anything? You hate it, don't you? You hate it, I know you hate it. I drove him crazy. Now I have to say I was much better with Sister Mine. I was much calmer. But yeah, it's a real talent. It's an art in itself, translation. It really is, and he's done. Of course,
you want to do the author justice, so there's a lot.
Yeah, and when you think about that, when you think about translating, it's not just taking the words and literally translating them into the other language. That's difficult enough. But how do you capture a writer's style? How do you capture her voice? That, to me, I don't know how they do it, how he does it. But I know he does it well, because my books are very well received in France. So,
and how about in some of the other countries? I'm wondering, because you were concerned about writing who wants to read about a depressed coal town, but people in
it's universal. Yeah, my books do very well in France, in the Netherlands, in Sweden. I've been published in Hungary and Croatia and even Turkey. So you just never know.
Now, Backroads, again, that debut novel that was such a sensation, it's actually in development to be made into a film by the same producer who produced the Academy Award-winning Capote. That must be pretty exciting.
Yes, I'm very, very excited about that. We had a film deal before for Backroads that fell through. There's been one with Coal Run that fell through. The thing with film deals,
you never know.
Yeah, they come, they go, they come, they go. But The reason the first one fell through with Backroads is a financing problem, and Michael O'Hoven has his own company, so far so good. There shouldn't be a problem with that. And they're adapting the screenplay
and are
now,
they consulting you, or do you have a role in this?
I will. They'd like to have me sort of on board to be available, sort of in a consulting way, and I think they are looking to film on location somewhere in Western Pennsylvania. So, but I don't want to be involved with the screenplay or any of that, and I think they like to have the author off to the side.
But do you have someone in mind who would play Harley, for example?
No, I don't.
No.
People ask me that all the time. I always refer them to my teenage daughter, who has plenty of actors, plenty of hot young actors that she wants to meet, that she wants to play Harley. But I don't know, because I don't know the young actors. I don't know who they are, so I don't.
I want to talk a little bit about your influences. You read a lot, obviously, and you said that William Faulkner and James Joyce are two people who have influenced your work, in part because they emphasize place, and they make the seemingly insignificant significant. Tell me a little bit about who you read and what you take from it.
Well, nowadays, I have to say I don't read much contemporary fiction. I don't read my peers necessarily. It's very rare that I do that, and I think it's because I have evolved to a point in my own writing where it's distracting for me to read what other people are writing. And
because it influences you, or?
No, just because it's distracting. It's really difficult to be working on your own book, living your life, and having somebody else's characters and whatnot in your head. I tend to, nowadays when I'm working, I read a lot of more of the classics and things that were written a long time ago. I've also been reading a lot of foreign authors. Americans, we don't read many foreign authors, which is a big mistake.
Well, that's one thing. The translations, there aren't so many that are translated into English.
Right.
Lots of our books are translated into other languages.
Right, and I've also become aware through Bernard, my husband, who reads in 8 different languages, and also too, not only do we not get a lot of translations, but a lot of times they're not even that good. You know, he'll read a book in English and he had read it in Russian, the native language, and can come back and say, oh, this translation's not so good. No wonder you didn't really like this author. And so I've been reading a lot of foreign authors that he's sort of acquainted me with. And although I will say I just finished reading Sina Jeter Naslin's book, Ahab's Wife. That was out a couple years ago, and that I really, really enjoyed. And she's currently writing. And I was so happy. Martin Cruz Smith, who I used to be one of my favorite authors, who wrote Gorky Park, the Arkady Renko mysteries. He's one of the only crime suspense, one of the few crime suspense writers I like. I didn't like a lot of his books. And then he just came back with a wonderful book, Wolves Eat Dogs. I just read that on the plane on my book tour. That was great. That was really good. So, but as far as my influences, like when I was just starting to write, Flannery O'Connor has always been sort of my literary idol. I do like a lot of Southern writers. Well, it's interesting you brought up William Faulkner and James Joyce, because they had a lot of impact on me when I was first reading them when I was much younger. But they're also authors who, for me, I have a real love-hate relationship with them.
Oh, why?
Because a lot of their work I don't like at all. And then some of their work I think is some of the most brilliant writing I've ever read. So to me, they're extremely inconsistent as far as what I like in a writer. So I try not to, I hope I'm just down the middle. But yeah, there's tons of authors who've influenced me. I can never remember them all.
Well, real quickly, speaking of influences, your story, the plot, the backdrop of all of the story with Shaylin Penrose sounds a little like the Q Creek mine disaster that so many of us read about in the newspaper.
Sure. Yeah. Ironically, I came up with this idea. It was about 6 months before Q Creek happened, and it was really strange because at the time I had not moved back to Pennsylvania yet. I was living in Chicago, and I got this idea, and I was sort of like noodling around with it, and then Q Creek happened. I can still remember my mom calling, who lives here, and because we have friends who live very close to Somerset, and she's like, "Oh my God, turn the TV on! Did you see this?" And as I was watching this happen, I was thinking, this is what I was thinking about 6 months ago, and it's even taking place in a Pennsylvania coal town. Of course, that's what I write about. And So after it happened, after they were rescued, I intentionally did not follow their story. Because when I write, I don't base my characters or anything in my books on things, news stories or whatever. I want to be able to completely fictionalize. Something may give me a spark of an idea, but I don't want to have it be based on real people. And so I did intentionally distance myself from that. I was like everybody else, you know, on the edge of my seat, hoping they got rescued. And once they did, though, then I said, I'm not going to follow this. So it's not based on them, but it's the same situation.
With a second remaining, are you working on something else?
Yes, I'm working on my next book. I'm hoping to have it done. My publisher is hoping that it will be done by this fall, and then it will be published in 2008.
All right.
So
Great talking with you. Best of luck with Sister Mine.
Thanks. Thanks.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.